The Italian billionaire watched the waitress speak to his mama in Italian, then whispered, "You stole my heart." There was only one person in the world who could make billionaire Luca Romano forget a billion-dollar deal, and that person was his mother. On a rainy Thursday evening in Manhattan, the private dining room of Romano Capital shimmered with crystal chandeliers, polished silver, and the quiet confidence of people who measured success in numbers most Americans would never see in a lifetime. Outside, rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows 70 stories above the city. Inside, executives discussed acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Luca sat at the center of the long table, his tailored charcoal suit flawless, his Swiss watch catching flashes of golden light whenever he moved his hand. At 38, he had built one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. People listened when he spoke. They agreed before he finished his sentences. Yet tonight, his attention drifted repeatedly toward the elderly woman seated beside him. Maria Romano looked elegant in a navy dress and pearl earrings, but there was a loneliness in her eyes that Luca noticed more often these days. Since moving from Italy years ago, she had never completely adapted to life in America. Her English was limited. Her world had grown smaller. Luca tried to make time for her, but business had a way of consuming everything. "Are you tired, Mama?" he asked quietly. Maria smiled and patted his hand. "Just listening," she replied in accented English. "Everyone speaks so fast." Luca felt a familiar pinch of guilt. Around them, conversations continued. Market forecasts, expansion plans, investment strategies, important topics. Yet none seemed as important as the woman sitting beside him. A server approached the table carrying a tray of espresso cups. Luca barely noticed her. She appeared no different from any other waitress working the event. Simple black uniform, blonde hair neatly tied back, calm posture, invisible almost. Her name tag read Claire Bennett. She placed a cup gently in front of Maria. The older woman looked up and offered a grateful smile. Then, almost absent-mindedly, Maria spoke in Italian. "This reminds me of the coffee my father used to make on winter mornings." It was a simple sentence, one she likely expected nobody to understand. Claire froze for half a second. Then she smiled. A warm smile, genuine. "The kind that filled the whole house before sunrise?" she answered in flawless Italian. Maria's eyes widened. The room seemed to pause. Not literally. The conversations continued. Glasses still clinked. Rain still whispered against the windows. Yet for Maria Romano, the world stopped turning. "You speak Italian?" she asked, now fully switching languages. Claire nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And from the sound of your accent, I'd guess Tuscany." The espresso cup trembled slightly in Maria's hand. Across the table, Luca slowly lifted his eyes from a contract. Something in his mother's expression caught his attention immediately. Joy. Pure, unexpected joy. The kind he had not seen in months. Maria laughed softly. "Madonna mia," she whispered. "You sound like someone I once knew." For the first time that evening, Luca truly looked at the waitress. And for reasons he could not yet explain, he suddenly forgot every number on the pages in front of him. Luca Romano had spent most of his life learning how to read people. It was one of the reasons he had become successful. Investors lied. Competitors exaggerated. Executives hid weaknesses behind polished presentations. Over time, he learned to spot confidence, fear, ambition, and deception within seconds. Yet, as he watched Claire Bennett continue her conversation with his mother, he realized he could not read her at all. Maria's face glowed with a happiness that transformed her entire appearance. The years seemed lighter on her shoulders. Her laughter came easier. Even the wrinkles around her eyes appeared softer beneath the golden chandelier light. Claire stood beside her chair holding an empty espresso tray, but she was no longer acting like someone serving drinks. She spoke naturally, comfortably, as if she had known Maria for years. "You know that expression?" Maria asked in Italian, clearly surprised. "My grandfather used to say it every Sunday morning," Claire replied with a small smile. "Usually before arguing about soccer and overcooking breakfast." Maria laughed again. A genuine laugh. Several guests glanced toward the sound. Luca noticed something else. Claire never tried to draw attention to herself. Many people became different around wealth. Louder, more eager, more performative. Claire did the opposite. The more attention she received, the more she seemed to step back. Quiet confidence. Nothing forced. Nothing artificial. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. One of the executives seated nearby leaned toward Luca. "Your mother seems to have found a new best friend." Luca gave a polite smile but said nothing. His attention remained fixed on Claire. Finally, she glanced toward the dining room and noticed another table signaling for service. Duty returned to her expression immediately. "I should get back to work," she told Maria gently. Maria reached out and touched her hand. "Promise you will come back?" Claire hesitated before nodding. "If I can." Then she walked away. Simple. Professional. No attempt to prolong the moment. No expectation of gratitude. Within seconds, she blended back into the rhythm of the evening. Carrying plates. Refilling water glasses. Moving between tables with effortless efficiency. Yet somehow the room felt different after she left. Maria watched her disappear into the crowd. "What a lovely girl," she said softly. Luca looked down at his paperwork again. The numbers were exactly where he had left them. The contract still awaited his signature. But the focus that usually came so easily refused to return. "Do you know her?" Maria asked. "No." "Interesting." Luca raised an eyebrow. "What is interesting?" Maria smiled knowingly. "You have looked at her 6 times in the last minute." Luca almost laughed. "I am observing." "Of course you are." Maria took a sip of espresso. "That is what you always say when something captures your attention." Luca shook his head and signed the final page of the contract. Yet even after completing the deal, his gaze drifted back across the room. Claire was helping an elderly couple near the window. She crouched slightly to hear them better. She smiled at something they said. The couple smiled back. It was such a small moment. Ordinary. Forgettable. Except it was not. Because for reasons he could not explain, Luca suddenly found himself wanting to know who she was before she put on that black uniform every morning. And for the first time in a very long time, curiosity felt more valuable than any business deal waiting on his desk. The dinner event continued long after the contracts were signed and the presentations concluded, but Luca Romano found himself paying less attention to business than at any point in his adult life. That alone was unusual. For nearly 2 decades, work had been the center of everything. Every decision, every priority, every hour. Success had demanded it. The empire he built had not appeared through luck. Came from sacrifice. While others spent weekends with friends, Luca studied markets. While others celebrated holidays, he negotiated acquisitions. Over time, ambition became routine, and routine became identity. Yet somewhere along the way, life had become quieter. Not peaceful, just quieter. The kind of quiet that settled into large apartments after midnight. The kind that waited at the end of every successful day. Across the room, Claire continued working as though nothing unusual had happened. She carried trays, greeted guests, and disappeared into the flow of service with practiced grace. The attention she had received from Maria clearly meant little to her. She did not seek another conversation. She did not linger nearby. She simply returned to work. Luca noticed that too. Most people approached him eventually. Some wanted opportunities. Others wanted introductions. Many simply wanted proximity to power. Claire wanted none of it. The realization was strangely refreshing. Beside him, Maria watched the room with thoughtful eyes. "You know what I miss most about Italy?" she asked softly. Luca turned toward her. "The food." Maria smiled. "Everyone misses the food." "Then what?" She glanced toward the rain sliding down the glass windows. People made time for each other. Conversations lasted hours. Nobody checked watches every 5 minutes. Luca looked instinctively at the Swiss watch resting on his wrist. Maria laughed. "Exactly." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Maria nodded toward Claire. She reminds me of your grandmother. That caught his attention immediately. How? Maria's expression softened. Not because they look alike, because they listen the same way. Luca followed her gaze. Claire was helping an older gentleman adjust his chair. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Yet she gave him her complete attention as though the rest of the room did not exist. Your grandmother always made people feel important, Maria continued, no matter who they were. Luca remembered that. Long summer afternoons in Tuscany. The smell of coffee. The sound of laughter drifting through open windows. Family gathered around crowded tables. A simpler world before private jets and boardrooms. Before success became complicated. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the event coordinators approached. Mr. Romano, the car is ready whenever you are. Luca nodded. The evening was ending. Guests were beginning to leave. Chairs shifted. Conversations faded. Across the room, Claire collected empty espresso cups and stacked them carefully onto a tray. For the first time all evening, she looked tired. Not unhappy, just human. Luca watched her disappear through a service door leading toward the kitchen. Something about that small moment stayed with him. He could not explain why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was nostalgia. Or perhaps it was the simple fact that in a room full of influential people trying to impress one another, the most memorable person had been the woman who never tried to impress anyone at all. The following afternoon, rain clouds still hung over Manhattan, turning the city skyline into a watercolor of gray glass and silver light. Claire Bennett arrived for her shift 20 minutes early, as she always did. Routine mattered, kept life organized, predictable, safe. She tied her apron, checked the reservation list, and slipped a small worn paperback into her locker before stepping onto the restaurant floor. The book had been with her for years. Its pages were faded, its cover nearly detached. Every line inside was written in Italian, a gift from her grandmother, a reminder of promises she still carried. The lunch crowd arrived steadily. Business executives, tourists, couples celebrating anniversaries. Claire moved through the dining room with quiet efficiency, greeting guests, refilling coffee cups, and remembering details most people overlooked. One customer preferred lemon with tea. Another liked extra napkins. A regular always ordered soup before looking at the menu. Small things, human things. Around 1 o'clock, the restaurant doors opened again. Claire glanced up automatically, then stopped. Luca Romano entered beside his mother. Neither appeared dressed for a business event. Maria wore a simple cream sweater. Luca had traded his formal suit for a navy sports coat and open-collar shirt. Somehow he looked less intimidating and more approachable. Maria's face brightened immediately when she spotted Claire. "There she is," she said in Italian. Claire smiled despite herself. "Good afternoon, Maria." Luca noticed the familiar ease between them. He also noticed something else. The way Claire's face changed when she spoke Italian. The language seemed to unlock a different version of her. Still quiet, still composed, but warmer somehow, more connected. "You came back," Maria said. "I promised I would if I could." Maria looked pleased with that answer. They settled at a table near the window overlooking the avenue below. Yellow taxis crawled through traffic 20 stories beneath them. Rain dotted the glass. The city moved endlessly. Yet inside the restaurant, everything felt slower, more personal. Claire brought menus and prepared to leave them alone. Then Maria asked a question in Italian. "Tell me something. Where exactly did you learn to speak like that?" For a brief moment, Claire hesitated. Not because she disliked the question, because the answer mattered. She looked toward the rain outside before speaking softly. "My grandmother came from a small village outside Florence." Maria's eyes widened. "Florence?" Claire nodded. "When I was little, she spoke Italian every day. She told stories, sang songs, read poems. I learned because I wanted to understand her." Luca listened carefully. There was no performance in her voice, no attempt to impress anyone, only honesty. "And you never forgot?" Maria asked. Claire smiled faintly. Some things are too important to forget. A quiet silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable, meaningful. Then Maria began humming an old Italian folk melody under her breath. A song so old Luca barely recognized it. Claire looked up immediately. Surprise flickered across her face. Without thinking, she softly continued the next line of the song. Maria froze. The melody ended. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Luca watched confusion cross his mother's face. Then emotion. Deep emotion. Maria whispered something so softly it almost disappeared into the sound of rain against the windows. That was Sophia's favorite song. The words settled over the table like falling snow. Sophia. Luca knew that name well. Every story from his childhood seemed to include it. Sophia Romano had been his grandmother's younger sister, the heart of every family gathering, the voice behind countless songs that echoed through generations. She had passed away many years ago in a small village outside Florence. Very few people outside the family even remembered her name now. Yet Claire had somehow known the melody that Maria had not heard in decades. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while the city moved on below them, unaware that something extraordinary had just happened at a quiet table near the glass. Maria blinked several times. Her eyes shimmered. "Where did you learn that song?" she asked gently. Claire lowered her gaze for a moment. "My grandmother used to sing it when I could not sleep." Maria stared at her. "What was your grandmother's name?" Claire smiled faintly. "Elena Bennett." Maria searched her memory. The name meant nothing, yet the connection felt real. Too real to dismiss. Claire seemed to sense the emotion growing heavier and quickly redirected the conversation. "She believed every song carried a piece of someone's history," she said softly. "She said when people forget songs, they sometimes forget parts of themselves." Maria placed her hand over her heart. "That sounds exactly like something my family would say." Luca remained silent, watching, listening. The analytical side of his mind searched for explanations. Coincidences existed. The world was full of them. Yet the number of coincidences appearing around Claire continued to grow. First the language, then the regional accent. Now a nearly forgotten family song. None of it seemed planned. None of it felt performative. If anything, Claire appeared slightly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Another server appeared near the table and quietly informed her that several guests needed assistance. Claire nodded immediately. Duty first. Always. She offered Maria an apologetic smile. "I should get back to work." Maria reached for her hand again. "Thank you." Claire seemed surprised. "For what?" Maria squeezed her fingers gently. "For reminding an old woman of home." For a brief second, Claire looked genuinely moved. Then she composed herself and stepped away. Luca watched her disappear among the lunch crowd once again. Several minutes passed. Neither he nor Maria spoke much. Finally Maria broke the silence. "You are thinking." Luca gave a small smile. "You always know, because you stare at the same spot whenever your mind is busy." She nodded toward the dining room. "And today that spot keeps moving around the restaurant." Luca laughed quietly despite himself. Maria smiled. "She is special. You barely know her. Sometimes that is enough." Luca looked through the rain-speckled glass. Across the room, Claire was helping a young mother calm a nervous child. A few moments later, she was assisting an elderly couple with their order. Every interaction carried the same patience, the same quiet dignity. Nobody received more attention than anyone else. Rich or poor, important or ordinary, she treated them all exactly the same. For reasons he could not fully explain, Luca suddenly found himself wanting to know the story behind the woman who carried forgotten songs in her memory as if they were precious treasures. That evening, long after the lunch crowd had disappeared and Manhattan's lights began reflecting across rain-dark streets, Luca found himself thinking about Claire far more than he intended. He sat alone in his office overlooking the city, a half-finished espresso cooling beside stacks of reports that normally held his complete attention. Yet every few minutes his thoughts drifted back to the same questions. Who was she? Why did she know so much about Italy? And how had a waitress somehow reminded his mother of memories she had not spoken about in years? Across town, Claire was finishing her own day. The restaurant had finally quieted. Chairs were being stacked, glasses polished, floors cleaned. She moved through the familiar routine with practiced efficiency. The work was demanding, but there was comfort in its rhythm. No surprises, no expectations, just honest effort. As she wiped down a corner table near the window, her manager approached carrying a small envelope. "Someone left this for you." Claire looked up. "For me?" He nodded. "The gentleman from earlier. The one with his mother." Claire accepted the envelope carefully. There was no logo, no business card attached, just a simple folded note inside. Curious, she opened it. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. "Thank you for being kind to my mother today. She has not smiled like that in a very long time." Claire read the sentence twice. Nothing more. No phone number. No request. No hidden agenda. Just gratitude. She folded the note again and slipped it into her apron pocket. For reasons she could not explain, the gesture touched her more than she expected. Most wealthy people notice service. Very few noticed kindness. Meanwhile, across the city, Maria Romano sat in her favorite armchair near the fireplace, holding an old family photo album. Luca had stopped by after work to check on her. At least that was what he told himself. The truth was less clear. Maria turned another page. Smiling faces, summer dinners, olive trees, generations connected through stories and traditions. Then she paused at a faded photograph. Two young women stood together in a Tuscan village square. One was Maria, the other was Sophia. "She would have liked that girl," Maria said softly. Luca glanced at the photograph. "You keep saying that." "Because it is true." Maria closed the album. "Do you know why?" Luca shook his head. "Because Claire listens before she speaks. People think intelligence is about having answers. Your grandmother believed it was about asking the right questions." Luca stared at the firelight dancing across the room. The words lingered. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, an unexpected thought crossed his mind. Perhaps he had spent years surrounding himself with impressive people while overlooking remarkable ones. Back at her apartment, Claire sat beside a small bookshelf and removed the note from her pocket one more time. She smiled faintly before placing it between the pages of her grandmother's old Italian book. Then she noticed something she had not seen earlier. A second sentence written beneath the first. Small, almost hidden. "My mother would like to hear that song again someday." Claire stared at the second sentence long after midnight. The small apartment around her was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic beyond the rain-streaked windows. "My mother would like to hear that song again someday." Such a simple message. Yet it carried a warmth she had not expected. She closed the book gently and rested her hand on its worn cover. Her grandmother had always believed that certain moments arrived for a reason. Not to change a life overnight, but to open a door that had been quietly waiting for years. The next afternoon, Claire arrived at work carrying that thought with her. The restaurant was unusually calm between lunch and dinner service. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Sunlight finally broke through the clouds, scattering pale gold reflections across the windows. She was arranging silverware when the hostess approached. "Someone is here to see you." Claire looked up in surprise. Few people ever asked for her directly. She followed the hostess toward the front of the restaurant and immediately saw Maria Romano standing near the entrance. Her smile appeared before she even spoke. "I hope this is not an interruption." Claire felt herself smile back. "Not at all." Maria held a small paper bag in her hands. "I brought something." Curious, Claire accepted it and carefully peeked inside. The aroma reached her instantly. Fresh biscotti. Homemade. She looked up. "You made these?" Maria nodded proudly. "This morning." Claire laughed softly. "Most people send thank you cards. Most people are boring." The answer made both women smile. They settled into a quiet corner booth while Claire remained technically on break. The conversation flowed naturally. Italy, family traditions, favorite foods, childhood memories. The topics shifted effortlessly from one to another. More than once, Claire forgot she was speaking with the mother of one of the wealthiest men in New York. Maria never acted important. She simply acted interested. After nearly 30 minutes, Maria reached into her purse and removed an old photograph. The edges were faded from time. "I wanted to show you something." Claire accepted the picture carefully. Several young women stood beneath olive trees on a hillside overlooking the Tuscan countryside. Their smiles seemed frozen in sunlight from another era. Maria pointed to one of them. "That is Sophia." Claire studied the face. Something about the expression felt strangely familiar. Kind eyes, gentle confidence, the sort of person who made others feel welcome. "She looks wonderful," Claire said. Maria nodded. She was. For a moment neither spoke. Then Maria tilted her head slightly. "Do you know what surprised me most about you?" Claire shook her head. "You carry memories the way older people do." Claire blinked. "I am not sure that is a compliment." Maria laughed. "It is where I come from." Before Claire could answer, another voice entered the conversation. Calm. Familiar. "I was wondering where my mother disappeared to." Claire looked up. Luca Romano stood beside the booth. Sunlight caught the edge of his navy jacket. His expression was relaxed, almost amused. Maria folded her arms triumphantly. "Good. You are here. Now sit down. There is something both of you need to hear." Claire looked from Maria to Luca, uncertain what exactly she had just agreed to. Maria, however, appeared completely satisfied with herself. She gestured toward the empty seat across from her. "Sit." Luca sighed with the familiar patience of a son who had learned long ago that arguing with his mother rarely accomplished anything. He pulled out the chair and sat down. Claire remained on the edge of the booth, aware that her break had technically ended several minutes earlier, yet somehow unable to leave. Maria placed the old photograph in the center of the table. "Do you see this hill?" she asked. Claire nodded. "Yes. Every summer our family gathered there." Her finger moved across the faded image. Music, food, stories. Nobody cared how much money anyone had. Nobody cared what job they worked. The only thing that mattered was whether you showed up for the people you loved. The words hung gently in the air. Luca listened without interrupting. He had heard pieces of these stories before, but today they felt different. Perhaps because Claire was hearing them too. Maria turned toward Claire. "My son thinks success solves loneliness." "Mama," Luca began. "You know I am right." She smiled without looking at him. Claire lowered her eyes politely. She had no intention of becoming involved in a family debate. Yet Maria continued. "For years he built companies, buildings, investment funds. Everything became larger except his personal life." Luca leaned back and shook his head. "I walked directly into that one." Claire could not help smiling. The sight seemed to surprise him. Not because she smiled, but because she rarely did it so openly. For a brief second, the serious businessman disappeared, replaced by someone far more human. Maria noticed it immediately. There. That expression. "I have not seen that in months." Luca laughed despite himself. "You planned this entire conversation, did you not?" "Of course." The answer arrived so quickly that all three of them laughed. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet afternoon rhythm. Dishes clinked softly. Sunlight reflected across polished glass. Somewhere in the distance, a coffee machine hissed. Ordinary sounds. Yet the moment felt strangely memorable. Then Maria grew thoughtful again. She looked at Claire. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you work so hard to keep your grandmother's traditions alive?" Claire hesitated. Not because she wanted to avoid the answer, because some truths deserved care. She folded her hands together before speaking. Near the end of her life, she began forgetting things. Maria's expression softened immediately. "I understand." Claire nodded. Names, dates, places. Some days she would look at photographs and struggle to remember who people were. Luca listened closely. The restaurant seemed quieter now. But there was one thing she never forgot, Claire continued. Italian. A faint smile touched her lips. Even on difficult days, she remembered every song, every poem, every story. She glanced at the old photograph. So I learned everything I could. Because if those memories mattered to her, they mattered to me. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Respectful silence. Maria slowly reached across the table and squeezed Claire's hand. Her eyes glistened. Luca watched the gesture and understood something important in that moment. His mother had not simply found someone who spoke her language. She had found someone who understood why it mattered. The afternoon slipped quietly into evening. Golden light faded beyond the restaurant windows, replaced by the glow of city lights stretching across Manhattan. Claire eventually returned to work, but something felt different. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, simply different. The conversation with Maria stayed with her long after she left the table. There had been a sincerity there she rarely encountered. No status, no expectations, just genuine human connection. As dinner service began, the restaurant filled once again with conversations, laughter, and the familiar rhythm of another busy night. Claire moved through the dining room with the same calm professionalism she always carried. Yet every so often she noticed Luca sitting alone at the corner table where he had remained after Maria left for an appointment with a friend. He was not working. That alone seemed unusual. A laptop rested unopened beside him. His phone remained untouched. Instead, he watched the city through the glass while nursing a single espresso. Near closing time, the last guests departed. Chairs began returning to tables. The staff moved through final tasks before heading home. Claire gathered menus near the entrance when she noticed a familiar object resting on one of the booths. A small silk scarf. Elegant. Cream-colored. She recognized it immediately. Maria had been wearing it earlier. Claire picked it up carefully. Before she could decide what to do, a voice spoke behind her. I was hoping someone would find that. She turned. Luca stood a few feet away. His jacket was draped over one arm. The long day showed in his eyes, but so did something softer than before. Claire held up the scarf. Your mother's. He nodded. She forgets things whenever she is busy enjoying herself. Claire smiled. That is a good problem to have. Luca stepped closer and accepted the scarf. For a moment neither spoke. Outside, headlights drifted across wet streets. Inside, the restaurant felt unusually quiet. Then Luca looked at her directly. Can I tell you something? Claire hesitated before nodding. Of course. He glanced down at the scarf in his hands. For years I thought success was about building something impressive. His voice remained calm, thoughtful. Companies, investments, achievements. Claire listened quietly. Then you spent 20 minutes speaking to my mother in her own language. A faint smile touched his face. And somehow that meant more to her than anything I have bought in the last 10 years. Claire lowered her eyes slightly. She misses home. No. Luca shook his head gently. She misses being understood. The words lingered between them. Simple. Honest. True. Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Luca noticed. He seemed to choose his next words carefully. Most people notice my money first. He smiled faintly. You noticed my mother. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. The kind that arrives when two people understand more than they need to say. Finally, Luca looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Vulnerable. Certain. Grateful. You know, he said softly. You did not steal my attention. Claire blinked. The city lights reflected in the windows behind them. You stole my heart. For a second, neither moved. Then Claire laughed quietly, surprised and genuine. Luca laughed too. And somewhere beyond the noise of the city, beyond the wealth and titles and expectations, two people discovered that the most meaningful connections often begin with something as simple as listening to another person's language, carrying another person's memories, and treating another person's heart like it matters.